Okay, today we're going to be talking about the geography of the Fertile Crescent. This is the first unit or first section of chapter 3 on Mesopotamia. The big idea is that the valleys of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers were the site of the world's first civilizations. So these two rivers were very important to Mesopotamia. The main idea is that the rivers of Southwest Asia supported the growth of civilizations, right? They would not be able to grow there or even be a civilization there were it not for those two rivers. And then new farming techniques led to the growth of cities. So they came up with some new ideas of farming, how to farm, that led to the growth of cities. So, in that main idea one, the rivers of Southwest Asia supported the growth of civilizations. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are the most important physical features of the region known as Mesopotamia. That is why there is a civilization there, is because of the Tigris and Euphrates River. And then farm settlements in Mesopotamia eventually developed into civilizations. And that goes back to what we talked about in the last chapter when they started to farm. They were able to settle, and as they settled, more and more people, this led to a civilization. Land between two rivers. That's what Mesopotamia means in Greek, between the rivers. That's why it's called Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia is part of a larger area of rich farmland called the Fertile Crescent. And Mesopotamia was divided into two regions in ancient times, northern and southern Mesopotamia. Let's take a minute and look at an animated history, and you can see the map here. Here's Mesopotamia. It's the land between the two rivers. This entire shape here is the Fertile Crescent.
The Tigris and Euphrates rivers flow through a region called Mesopotamia. The name means land between the rivers. Rain and melting snow in the mountains cause the rivers to swell almost every year. As they flowed down the mountains to the Persian Gulf, the rivers picked up a fine soil called silt and carried it downstream. The silt was deposited onto the floodplain, the flat land around the banks of the rivers. The silt was fertile, which means it was good for growing crops.
So here you see this crescent shape here. That is the Fertile Crescent. The Mesopotamia is this land here, right between these two rivers.
Because the land was fertile, people didn't have to search for food and were able to settle in villages. Villages grew into cities with complex cultures. These cities formed the world's first civilization in Sumer, a region in southern Mesopotamia. The Sumerian cities became city-states, communities that included a city and its nearby farmlands. There were at least 12 city-states, located mostly near the mouths of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Sumerian civilization included inventions such as wheeled chariots, the first alphabet, and a form of government in which each city-state ruled itself. Sumerian culture and innovations spread throughout Mesopotamia. Over time, soil deposits filled in the area where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers emptied into the Persian Gulf. Today, the coastline is over 100 miles south of its location during the Sumerian civilization.
Okay, so there you see Mesopotamia, the Fertile Crescent, and the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Going back to our note packet, the rise of civilizations. So, as they said in the short animated history we just watched, annual floods on the Tigris and Euphrates rivers brought silt that made the land ideal for farming. So the floods the water would go out into the plain, and when it receded and went back into the river, it would leave this silt, which is a mixture of rich soil and tiny rocks. Plentiful food led to the population growth and the formation of villages. So the more food that they had, that led to more people. and the population grew. And villages later developed into the world's first civilizations. Main idea, too, is new farming techniques led to the growth of cities. You may have remembered that we talked a little bit about irrigation earlier in the year. Farmers used irrigation and canals as a way to control river flow. Remember, irrigation is where they would dig channels uh, from the river and allow their crops to be watered. Increased amounts of food led to surpluses, which meant that fewer people needed to farm. So a surplus is an increased amount of food, okay, having more than you need. And as a result of this, new occupations developed. Remember, occupations are jobs. Controlling water. The water levels of the Tigris and Euphrates would rise or fall depending on the amount of rainfall. Irrigations and canals help solve flooding. Remember, irrigation is a way of supplying water to an area of land, and canals are human-made waterways. Farmers also built up the banks of the rivers to hold back the floodwaters. And I'll give you a good illustration of this. Here you see a city, okay, an early settlement in Mesopotamia, where it was located near the river, as you see, and water was not controlled, and flooding was a major problem. So you can see that flooding was a problem here. So later on, people built canals to protect houses from flooding and move water to their fields. So now you see this same place, they've built up a little bit of a side here to protect the city, and then you have lots of different canals that the water can then go into, and they can control that water. Go to the next one. You'll see now, look at it. With irrigation, the people of Mesopotamia were able to grow more food. So now they could grow food, okay, here in these areas. And then you had the canals and the channels that would water it, and again, keep the water out of the city and stop it from flooding. Because of all this, because of the food surplus, having more than enough food that they needed, this allowed some people to stop farming and concentrate on other jobs like making clay pots or tools, as you see in this picture. Food surpluses in effect. So because they had more than enough food, what happened? Well, irrigation increased the amount of food farmers produced. This created a food surplus, or more food than they needed. Because they had more food than they needed, fewer people needed to farm, so they took on other roles and jobs. When workers specialize in a particular task, a division of labor is created. So they're dividing up the work between lots of different people. Large projects were undertaken, which led to the need for structure and rules. And then settlements grew in size, creating cities between 4,000 and 3,000 BC. So that's it for section 3.1. You're now going to complete the assignment 3.1. Just look for the green puzzle piece on Schoology.